Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Cory Parker, and today we have episode 459 for December 15th, 2025. The holiday season is upon us, and I am very much looking forward to spending some time with my family and just having some downtime. So, as I have come to do in December, when I try to take most of the month off, I try to gather up some really fun episodes to put together ahead of time for you guys to listen to, because I don't want to go, several weeks without a podcast. I think I've gone almost 9 years now I think I've missed literally 1 week in that entire time where I didn't put out a podcast. Some of that was careful planning on my part for, doing things ahead of time when I knew I was going to be out on vacation or something. But it's kind of my commitment to you. I think that consistency is one of the most important things with the podcast. I myself like to listen to podcasts, and I don't like it when there's a week when there isn't one from one of my favorite podcasts. And so what I've done in December is I put together 3 podcasts in a row that follow this format. What we're going to do today is we're going to do the best of 2025. And this is, as I've said before, it's hard to say the best of. I like all my interviews. I love most of my interviews. And it's really, really hard to pick, anything that I would really say is the best of. There's just no way. There's so much content. And I'm just going to pick snippets. Like, I had whole interviews that I thought were fantastic and that I would love to just replay. But instead, I've gone back and just picked some choice nuggets from some of my favorite interviews to replay here. Ones that I think hold up well and have some interesting points. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go through several snippets. I'm going to introduce each one to give you some more context and remind you what we were talking about. And then next week, I'm going to bring back an episode from the vaults. And since I've done this for 9 years now, or nearly 9 years now, there's a lot of really old interviews that I've done that, well, first of all, still hold up today. And second, were probably ones you've never heard. I'd be actually very curious to know, and please send me an email if you're one of these people who has actually listened to my podcast the whole way. I bet there's nobody. I bet there's nobody that's been through every episode, unless maybe you went back and listened to some of the older episodes to catch up, which I guess I would still be interested in knowing. But I'll be very curious to know who's been with me that long. But anyway, given that it's been that long ago, even if you were listening back then, you've probably forgotten the interview. So I'll go back and pull out a classic episode. In this case, I pulled back my very first interview with Troy Hunt. You're going to hear that next week, and I'll tell you more about it then. But then after this classic replay from the vault, I'm going to do another best of 2025 episode, except this one's going to be a best of the bonus content. You hear me talk about, hey, the patrons are going to get bonus Q&A this week with so-and-so, my interview guest, and give them a heads up of what's coming with the bonus episode. But unless you're a patron, you've never heard these things. So all that will be brand new content for you if you're not a patron. And that's going to come out in a couple of weeks. And then we'll kick off 2026 with my annual New Year's resolution episode, which will be a news show with some tips of the week for possible things you might want to do for yourself in 2026. So that's going to be the schedule for the rest of the year. So you've got a lot to look forward to there. And I'll say 2 more things before we get into today's episode. First of all, these episodes will be great ones for you to share with other people who you think might also enjoy this podcast. It'll be great ones to share on social media because it will give everybody a little taste of what this podcast is like. And I know people are busy this time of year, so this is probably the wrong time of year to do it. But this is the time of year when I try to get my audience to help me expand that audience. It's like the old Pert Plus commercial. So I think it was Pert Plus, and they told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends. It's that kind of thing. I've got some other annual things coming up. I've got the annual listener survey that'll go out in January. I'm going to be running that along with a new patron promotion. So if you'd like to check out my Dragon Challenge coins, those are something I'm probably going to be giving away during that promotion. And again, when you listen to the best of the bonus podcast, that'll give you an idea of what you're missing. There's a lot of really great perks to being a patron. So enough of that. Let's get to a little trip down memory lane. Let's go back and pick out some of the juiciest nuggets from 2025. All right, so here's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to be going through some of my favorite interviews from the last year, picking out some little representative snippets from each of those interviews. And fun fact, I'm actually doing this with you. Like, I want to re-experience these myself. So my process for doing this is I have throughout the year saved off these snippets and put them in a folder. And so now I am re-listening to them myself and then coming back and giving you the intro or context for that little bit of the interview. So this first snippet was back from February, and I'm going to kind of do these in chronological order from this year. And we were talking to Dr. Paul Ashley from Anonymy Labs, the makers of the MySudo product, the app, the service, which is fantastic, by the way. And it's a great way for making aliases for yourself, some secondary email addresses, and even phone numbers. And we were talking about data minimization and why companies should not be collecting so much of it and holding on to it. You seem convinced from things I've seen you say that we could encourage businesses to have a privacy by design approach, focusing on minimizing data collection and securing data to collect. You seem kind of optimistic that that could be, but how do we sell businesses on this model? Because it really seems to be like surveillance capitalism is just so lucrative that most of these companies just can't seem to give that up.
Well, I think it is. It's a bit like a drug habit. Like they've got, they've got their first pieces of data for free, and then they've decided to collect more and more. There is a kind of an alternate viewpoint, and I think it's Semantic that labelled it something like black data. The other side of that equation is when these companies are collecting data, they're putting themselves at a high risk. So what you see is, you'll see that example like Marriott Hotels or Delta Airlines. As soon as one of those hacks happen, right, 5 million accounts being hacked, it has email address, credit cards, phone numbers, all those things. It is such a reputational damage for that site. So there is a counter argument to say that you should only store the minimal you need for the business because any more is creating liabilities. We had a great example of a telco that got hacked, right? And they got 7 years worth of personal information, people doing KYCs to get mobile phones and things like that. And the obvious question is why were they keeping all that? They didn't need it. Like once they've done their KYC check like we do, like you've done that identity verification, you can throw it away. You don't need that data anymore. You've done that, right? And they said, the government mandated we kept it for 7 years, that data. And so it's a big liability to keep personal data. So there is a counterpoint to surveillance capitalism. It's, there's a drug to say, the more I know, the better, and I can sell that data and all that. But there is a real reputational damage. And that's why there is this term of dark data and bad data, because the more you keep, the higher you're at risk and the more reputational damage you can be under. And there's also privacy laws. If you think about GDPR says, it was all about right to be forgotten, which originally was about I could be dropped off search engines and things, but it turned into I can get my account deleted, right? And that's why you see all these services now for deleting accounts. So again, like the more information got in disparate areas, the harder it is to be able to fulfill that sort of GDPR requirement. And you see California got a Privacy Act as well. So I think there is a counter argument now to say at one time, sure, it was good to get all that sugar, but over time, the sugar just makes you fatter or something. And so I think that it's the same with that. Like it's good to collect all that personal data, but the more you collect, the more risk your company's at of some sort of intrusion, it's just inevitable. I mean, for most companies, it's just inevitable. It's just a matter of time. Will it be next month? Will it be next year? Most companies. And so if you go from the attitude that at some point I'm going to be, someone's going to be able to get in here, let's keep the minimal data I can so I'm minimizing my exposure.
I think the Gravy Analytics hack is just a perfect example of that. This company was so greedy about collecting as much information as possible and do it in some really shady ways, collecting a lot of information about a lot of different people. And then, if you collect it, they're going to come for you, and they did. And now it's that's right. It's like a honeypot for them. It's just a honeypot. It's like you're just making it so attractive. If you've got all this data, you're making it really attractive to people put big efforts to get in there and get it. Don't do that. Just don't do that. And as I said, if you look at, the anonymity back-end systems, it's all encrypted data. So I don't know, people have got in and tried to steal data, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This, it's pretty hard to decrypt that stuff. And every user, in fact, every pseudo has got different encryption keys. So, it's just too much work. I'll go somewhere a lot easier than that. All right, next up, this was from my first interview with Yael Grauer, who's an amazing person and just so fun. And we were talking about Consumer Reports security planning tool, which is a great tool. Security Planner is wonderful. Check it out, securityplanner.consumerreports.org, I think. It's a very helpful tool for walking you through your threat model, which is a great way to start any conversation about security and privacy, and then gives you some detailed recommendations. And they keep it up to date, which is wonderful. We just talked with Yael as part of the best and worst gift guide episode, which I really hope we could do every year. I keep saying that, I think, trying to manifest it. But it was a lot of fun. And if you missed that, definitely go back and check that one out. But anyway, this is she and I airing out some of our AI grievances. One of the things when I talked to Stacy, she was talking about escrowing, not the source code for companies in case they go under, but escrowing enough money to continue to support something if necessary. I think that kind of regulation I thought was interesting. And maybe we should, one of the things we could be requiring is that they have enough staff to handle account takeover security issues, because that is something you need usually immediate help with. And you can't, of course, they'll try to do it with some like AI agent or something, but you really need a human to help you through something like that. And there should be people on staff. I absolutely agree. Trying to find a human at these places is not impossible. The other thing I've heard people do is go to social media and call them out there, and sometimes they get contacted.
But like, what better incentive is there for them to prevent it if they had to pay, like they actually have skin in the game? Because they actually have to help people whose accounts are taken over. But yeah, no, I hate the AI. I got in an AI war with an Uber Eats AI because they sent me food that wasn't delivered and I wanted a refund. I'm one of those annoying people that will keep trying to get a refund. like I don't just give up and then I think their AI told me that they could not deliver a refund. They couldn't give me a refund. It was just like cut and paste over and over and over again. And I'm like, I'm going to contest the credit card charge. But then people told me like they might cut off your entire account. And I'm like, oh my God, like I can't use Uber anymore because I didn't want to pay for food I didn't get. But I think what the issue was is that they require a photograph, but I didn't provide a photograph because I couldn't photograph
of what?
Like the missing items, I guess.
How do you photograph something you don't have?
Maybe you just photograph everything else to show that it's missing. Here's my empty porch. Yeah, exactly. And so I think I just skipped the image, and so I think it flagged it as not being a real report because I didn't provide an image of an empty box or space or something. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I don't think that, I'm not saying that there should never be AI used in these, but there should be like a manual review by a human, not just an AI pretending to be a human. So yeah, it's bad. Everything is bad. And I think that's been the problem with some of these account takeovers too, is that you fill out a form and get like a rote response, or like it's like you're just, banging your head against the wall. At least if it's a human that doesn't care, you like, no.
It's kind of like the old now old phone props where, it's asking you to, is this your problem or is this your problem? And you just say representative over and over again until finally we'll get you a representative. It's the same thing with support tickets. The first one you get is always automated. Like there's some keyword search they do through your ticket text, your submission, and like he mentioned password and he mentioned this, and that not a human doing this. Some automated thing said send them this stock reply, and it says if you still have questions, reply. And then,
I dealt with this with the healthcare thing where they were trying to make me pay for something that was supposed to be covered. And I'm like, oh my God, I filed like 4 complaints. Like I got review on all of them, and they just will automatically, but I'm that annoying person that'll be like, well, this was probably coded wrong and I'm going to call these 4 people. Like I probably do it too much. Like, I don't know if it's like a healthy way to live.
Yeah. Right.
But you shouldn't have to be relentlessly annoying to get a refund. And it's, but I'm like, how much money do they make because people give up? Which I don't think that giving up is like, probably I should give up more because I'm spending more time and energy on it than the refund is worth.
Yeah.
But like,
but you're holding their feet to the fire,
Yeah, exactly. But I'm like, how much are they saving because people just give up, especially for healthcare because you're sick and dealing with the actual illness or condition that you have. So
again, back to the fatigue thing. I think at some point that's factored in. Like they're trying for that. That's not a bug; it's a feature to some of these systems. All right, next up, this is one of my interviews with some of the OG hackers, and I love doing these interviews. I can't wait to interview more folks. I keep meeting more of them, so I've got a few already on the line that I'm going to try to interview probably in the next year. So stay tuned for those. But this was an interview with Chris Wysopal, a.k.a. Weld Pond, from The Loft. The second person I've interviewed from The Loft, Space Rogue, was my first. But both of them told this story, and they each had their own twist on it. And this was about them going to testify in front of Congress, which is a great clip, by the way. And if you find the original episode for this, and again, there's links to all this in the show notes, you can go back and find the link to that congressional testimony by these hackers, which was just amazing to watch. But anyway, on the way down there, they were planning to stop by the NSA's Cryptologic Museum, which I recently visited myself earlier this year. It's a great place to go. If you're ever in DC, you should definitely check it out. And they wanted to check it out too, but it's also right next to the NSA. And let's just say a funny thing happened on the way to the Cryptologic Museum. All right, so I want to bring back one story that came from the book that I want to get your take on, and that was your trip famously to the 1998 Senate testimony with Fred Thompson. I always, whenever I see that clip, I still think Law and Order, but which I can't remember which he did first. But anyway, you guys are on the way there, and you have some strange van you rented and put all sorts of radio equipment on, and ended up you're going to the National Cryptologic Museum, which is the NSA's museum, which seems like a funny thing. No such agency has a museum, but you went to go visit the museum but turned in the wrong spot. Give me your take on that story. And I'm also curious, what were you looking for with the SIGINT? What kind of signals were you hunting for?
Yeah. So, when we got invited to speak at the Senate, there was 7 of us. So, and no one had a car big enough. And I said, well, why don't we rent a van and drive down? That'll be more fun than flying. And, and the Senate was going to reimburse us. So we could have flown down, but we thought it would be just more fun to go down together in a van. And, DC isn't that far from Boston to drive. And so I rented this 14 passenger van. I think it was a Dodge Ram van. It was quite big, and it was dark green, and it had tinted black windows, so it just sort of looked cool. Like it almost looked like a government vehicle. And then we put antennas on the top, because at the time Wi-Fi was brand new. I don't even know if Bluetooth was out yet, but we were, there's all kinds of digital data signals, pager signals and things like that we were interested in capturing and decoding. The Loft actually shipped as a product the POCSAG decoder kit. POCSAG is an acronym that stands for it specifies a pager protocol, and we actually made a little kit that you could attach to a radio, a scanner, and decode pager messages. So this was something that we would be using on the way down to watch pager traffic on the way down. And people don't realize
were you war driving kind of too? Was that a thing you guys did?
War driving was it was just on the cusp of war driving. Like the term hadn't been made yet, but yeah, we definitely had Wi-Fi radios, which were also brand new for a laptop back then. So we're driving down, and we took a route that would take us by the NSA's Cryptologic Museum, because why not? We heard they had Enigma machines there, and we could just see a lot of the old crypto gear that was very mechanical and just a cool thing to do. And so I just had to paint the scene a little bit, because what happens is a little crazy. So we're driving down in this van. It's dark green with tinted windows, and the 2 guys in the front seat are relatively clean cut looking. Like Space Rogue was former military. He's got a buzz cut on. He always wears sunglasses when he's driving. And the other guy, Stefan, who was actually driving at the time, again, short hair, mirror shade, sunglasses. And so we're driving down the highway, and we see the sign that says NSA Cryptologic Museum up ahead. And then there's another sign, and it says NSA Employee Entrance right off the highway. And I think Stefan got something confused, and he just drives off the highway right into the employee entrance of the NSA. And he's driving, and he's kind of hesitating a little bit at the gate. And I just have to, picture this. This is a military base. The NSA is part of the Department of Defense. So it's got a guard shack, big gate with, barbed wire on the top, and people standing outside with automatic weapons. And the gate was open. It just happened to be open. Maybe they were waiting for someone, the next car, who knows? And they just waved us in to the employee parking lot. So we just drive right through, And this is when us in the back seat, which are kind of heads down, and Space Rogues was probably looking down on his computer, even in the front seat, and kind of said, what just happened? Like, where are we? And we look around, and we're on the inside of the fence. And the first thing we say is, we have to get out of here. Like, if we get stopped and they start questioning us, this is going to take a while. And so turned around, went a loop around the parking lot, and just drove out again. And luckily, no one stopped us, asked for ID. It was just the most bizarre incident.
That's hilarious.
I think we were a little bit worried that, for the moment, like, what if we get stopped and we can't even make our hearing in the morning?
It sounds like the classic, like, put on an orange vest and either carry around a clipboard or a ladder, and like no one will stop you. You just look the part.
Into the NSA headquarters. It's just kind of crazy.
All right, this next one's a clip from my discussion with Lisa LaVasseur from the Internet Safety Labs. And that group is doing some truly amazing work. And I know this because I am a part of a weekly call with them where they are discussing really deep topics and trying to come up with a very solid framework for reporting on privacy issues in applications. And we're already seeing some of this now with their tool called the App Microscope. And if you go to appmicroscope.org, you'll see what I'm talking about. But since I interviewed her, they are still working furiously on a lot more stuff to come. So stay tuned for some more great stuff from them. But in this clip, we're talking about student apps and student privacy and the laws that supposedly cover them, though not well enough, and how old they really are, and the consent model, which is all messed up, and just the rampant data collection of our kids in school from devices that they should be able to trust. One of the ways we like to say that users have choices, at least in the United States, the way we've done privacy is all this notice and consent model. We inform you, and then you get to make the choice, and it's all on you, right? Well, you know where I'm going. You know where I'm going with this. But again, though, it's different with adults versus kids. In fact, COPPA, I believe, is one of the laws that directly address that. Like, that's where I think, isn't that the one where you've got to be 13 or older to get a Facebook account or something without parents' permission or something, right? So it's in the case of students, where does the control lie? What do the students themselves, maybe if they're older, or do the parents have some way to limit data collection or opt out of data collection or disable some monitoring features? How does that play out when you're talking about minors and students?
Yeah, okay, so I am not a lawyer, but I'm going to say some comments about regulations now. So I encourage all listeners to double check what I'm about to say. But so there's two laws that come into play for student privacy. One is FERPA, family, I don't even know what it stands for, FERPA, F-E-R-P-A.
Yeah.
It's some kind of Family Privacy Rights Act thing.
Family Education Rights and Privacy Act.
There you go. Thank you.
I had to look it up.
There's FERPA and there's COPPA. And they have different regulatory bodies. COPPA is overseen by the FTC, and FERPA is overseen by the Department of Education, which may not be around for much longer, which is
okay. Yes.
of interest in this discussion. So FERPA was the thing that was trying to control like the paper records. It's a very old law.
Oh,
okay. It's the paper like that. It was written in the time of schools having paper records for everything. I didn't realize
that. Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's an older law, but FERPA has the ability in it for schools to consent on behalf of students under certain circumstances.
Oh wow.
Yeah, there are these weird, like limited exceptions for how the school can consent on behalf of students. I think there's an enormous amount of confusion over whether or not schools can consent. And my understanding is that FERPA does allow that. COPPA does not allow that. Schools do not fully understand that because we saw a number of schools that said, we're consenting to the following list of hundreds of apps on behalf of the student under COPPA, which is a falsehood. That is not possible. And in fact, the rules that the FTC published earlier this year, after I want to say almost 2 years of looking at it, we provided comments last year on it. They really try to tighten that up and make sure that there is a consent, a parental consent action in there. That was an important thing to have and to clarify. And so I believe that has been addressed for the better in this latest batch of rules that have come out. So it's confusing landscape. Schools, I think, are confused. Everybody's confused about it.
Which, by the way, I think is by design in some cases. Some of the certainly privacy policies in terms of services are often not meant to be transparent as they claim to be.
Yeah. Well, and then getting back to the fundamental issue of, are parents even consenting when they're consenting? Because there are some really wonderful advocates out there working very hard on this kind of stuff, like Heidi Sauce is working on this. And we work with the EdTech Law Center with Julie and Andy Liddell in Austin. And quite often it's a case of like, you must consent to our use of these platforms, this ed tech infrastructure, right? I'll use that to distinguish that from the sort of like ABC game or whatever. But parents will find themselves, and I've heard this from a number of parents, they will find themselves basically coerced into providing consent. They will be told that their child will fall behind, will not be able to participate in the classroom activities, and basically they have no alternative. There really is no alternative that they're provided with. So it's comply or don't. And the other thing I will say too is that we've been looking at these larger ed tech platforms a little bit more closely, and one of the disturbing things I'm observing, and there's going to be more coming out about this in several arenas, I think, in the next year or so. Some of these companies are starting to look like data brokers, marketing platforms, like the ed tech themselves have. It's as if they've realized like, oh, wait, we've got a lot of data here. We've got a lot of personal information. Right. And I think if memory serves, on the PowerSchool board, there is an executive from LiveRamp, which is one of the biggest data brokers in the world. Yeah. So I think, stay tuned on this front, because I think there's going to be a lot more scrutiny and exposure of what these platforms, these mandatory platforms, are actually doing.
Well, and collect it, they will come. I mean, these are just giant honeypots of information. Even if you collect this data and ostensibly protect it, it's just like PowerSchool was breached, right?
Yeah, that's why you know the name. But even beyond that, before that, I think there's a class action about the data collection and unconsented data collection practices.
All right, this next clip's from an interview I did with Zach Edwards, and we were talking about this system called real-time bidding. And whenever you go to a website, or in some cases use an app on your phone that is supported by advertising, behind the scenes, what is often happening is there's some banner space on that app that's like, put an ad here, and they contract third-party companies to fill that with ad space, and then they just say, send me a check. Like, put ads here, make some money, and then give me a cut of that. And so a lot of the apps and websites that use these don't even really know necessarily what's being put in those spaces. It's a rented billboard. And the real-time bidding process behind the scenes is everything we know about the person who's currently viewing this web page is sent out to potentially thousands of advertisers saying, here's what we know about this person. Who wants to show this person an ad right now? Start the bidding. And all this happens in milliseconds, if not microseconds. And somebody wins that bid, and then the ad is shown, whoever won the auction. Well, the problem is all that data about you, the person who's looking at that ad space, has just been shared with a lot of people. And that often includes things like your location. And that can cause real problems, like in the real world, as we are about to hear. Okay, so it's bad enough that all this stuff is done for advertising purposes. And, and again, this is sort of the bargain we've made to keep the web, quote unquote, free, right?
Exactly.
But it gets a whole lot worse, because even if for some reason you're like, you know what, I'm okay with that. I'll take free products. I'll take the free internet if that means I get better ads and more targeted. You know what? I like targeted ads.
Yeah.
That some people will say that.
Yeah.
However, this stuff is used in many other ways. So besides, intelligence agencies, law enforcement agencies, criminals, to paraphrase A Field of Dreams, collect it and they will come.
Yeah,
and this has
absolutely.
happened. Like, this is not theoretical. So who else is wanting this information and how are they getting it?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to appreciate that it's not just for commercial purposes. I think everyone here understands businesses have to exist. Money has to be exchanged for this world to work as it is. But this data that's flowing into these systems is extremely interesting for intelligence purposes. And there's been multiple scandals over the last couple of years. There's been some Israeli intelligence companies that had access to this bid stream, and they created presentations which essentially said, we can micro-target individuals and track them for offensive actions. And the nightmare scenario that I always sort of like to point out to people is, so imagine you are a nuclear scientist in Iran, and you have a favorite restaurant that you go to, and it's a local chain, but let's say maybe they have a website or an app that happens to monetize itself with ads, or they're buying ads on the internet, and so the ads are being shown to their customers based on some sort of targeting that they're doing. Entities can basically collect that data, and it gives you an initial seed to hunt for someone. And there's a lot of basically details where these companies, once they start getting this data, they can get location data with a lot of these advertising flows. And so if there's someone that you're targeting and they work at an Iranian nuclear plant, but you don't know where they live, you basically just have to keep monitoring their advertising data. And when these organizations don't turn off, when they bring their personal devices into work, you will then be able to potentially track them from work to their home, to their vacation house, to where they spend time at restaurants. And you could basically find places where they could be vulnerable for attacks. And unfortunately, that's literally happened based on various details that have been made public, that there have been offensive attacks, basically people being physically targeted because of data that was leaked into the bid stream. And another example that I like to give, so beyond just governments being able to capture this bulk data, targeting certain sensitive people, the Pentagon is a place that every data broker project that's ever existed, they're analyzing the traffic to and from the Pentagon. And in any given day, there's just thousands of people that go to the Pentagon that are broadcasting their location through the bid stream and can be tracked back to their homes. And so this is definitely a foreign and domestic problem. But it's not just sort of that track them to their work and their home and these government interests that are doing that. There's private interests, and one example is a priest who happened to be in charge of the Catholic bishops, and an organization basically decided to have a political agenda, and they bought data to try and figure out how priests were moving around the country. I don't exactly know all of their motives behind doing this, but they bought this data, they tracked various churches, and then they identified this church and this priest's home, and they basically found his mobile device in that, and then they tracked him going to locations for gay men for dating, like a bathhouse type of thing. I don't think it was a bathhouse per se, but some sort of maybe a gay bar or something like that. And they doxed this guy. They basically put out public information saying, we bought data from the bid stream, we confirmed this guy was gay, and then they pressured him to quit. And it was a horrifying example of basically, you can have really nasty motives, really awful incentives, and buy this bulk data, and then do somewhat horrifying things with it. And it's happening sort of every day, both in the government sector, but also in the private sector as well.
All right. Next up, we've got another one of my favorite interviews. I like them all, but I mean, some of them do stand out. And I had finally gotten the opportunity to, first of all, go to Shmoocon. It was one of the coolest hacker conferences on the planet. I had tried several years to go, and they sold out in literally seconds. And so I never went because I didn't have a ticket. And it turns out that a lot of people don't get tickets because it's constrained on purpose. And so a lot of people just go. They just show up. And at the hotel, people just congregate in the lobby, and it's called LobbyCon. Anyway, I had the wonderful opportunity to interview the co-founders of Shmoocon, Heidi and Bruce Potter. And they are a very interesting couple, and it was a really fun interview. And when you run a conference, there's just all sorts of crazy stories of things that have happened over the years, near-death experiences or things that just go horribly wrong. And over the years, after time, they become funny stories. And this is one of their stories about an incident that happened, I think, around the snowpocalypse, which would explain the accident that occurred in this story. But let's just let Bruce and Heidi explain what happened in this series of unfortunate events.
I suppose another iconic story is the broken chandelier story.
So every year, at least in the early days, we would have giveaways and throw stuff in the audience and whatever. And at some point, Poplos, one of the OG schmooze, is up on stage. And it wasn't Poplos?
Redbeard.
Oh, it was Redbeard?
Yeah, not to call you out, Redbeard, but it was Redbeard.
Redbeard. And everyone's throwing these like roll-up T-shirts and all this other crap in. And the venue, was that the Hyatt?
Yeah, it was the year we jumped to the Hyatt because of the inauguration.
And they had some wacky, like they always have these ballroom chandeliers that are like, crazy looking and whatever. And Redbeard throws one and it runs.
As Bruce says, stop, we're going to move on to something else.
Yeah.
Like literally he's saying stop.
Because like the risk manager in me is looking at this and like, people are going to get hurt. Like I'm ending this now. And so I'm like, all right, we're done. And then he throws this one last T-shirt. It hits the chandelier, and this chandelier was made out of like just good wishes, and like glass just exploded. And I was like, "Holy crap!" And so the miraculous thing is, no one looked up at it and caught glass in the eye. Like how nobody heard the noise and didn't just instinctively rear back and look, and instead they looked down, glass rained down on the floor, and everybody was fine. I'm like, all right, that's our miracle this year. Like,
right at the very end. Well, it was terrifying because that's happening. As that's happening, one of my other staff members comes up and whispers in my ear. That happens. And I like burst into tears on stage. And to everybody else, it looks like I'm bursting into tears because the chandelier has exploded, which was partially true. But it's because in conjunction with that, the staff member who whispered in my ear had just told me that the person who was driving, we were handling the trucks a little bit differently at this time. The person who was picking up our return truck had just hit another car. And so I was like, it was so overwhelming in that like 30 seconds that my body just like went poof, and I was just like, I don't know if anybody's hurt. I don't know. Like I couldn't, so I had like this like 30 seconds of like, is everybody okay? And then once like Bruce was like, is everybody okay? And the answer was yes from the audience. And I was like, is everybody okay? And the answer was yes in this direction. Then I was fine. Because like everything else, you can deal with it. I needed to know that people, were okay. And then we were able to move on.
Yeah.
All right, next up, we've got a clip from Deviant, and no, that's not his given name, but is the name he goes by. I met him at KakalakiCon several years ago. He is one of the most interesting people I think I've ever met, and he gives really interesting discussions. He is a physical penetration expert. He's into lockpicking, he's into safe cracking, and getting into buildings and facilities where you're not supposed to do that. Part of his job is actually being paid to try to break into some of these places and then give a report about the vulnerabilities that he found, the way he got in. A lot of it has to do with social engineering, but there's a lot of other stuff too. Anyway, in this clip, we're talking about prepping and what people can do to prepare for disasters. And he has some interesting points to make about what people often get wrong. A lot of the traditional scenarios when people think about preparing often revolve around natural disasters or things that can happen because of a natural disaster, fires, hurricanes, power outages, You can find plenty of online resources for these, and a lot of them skip over the why part. Like they just focus on what to do. There's a checklist of things to do or buy, but there's not a lot of discussion about like the strategy or the thinking behind them. Again, the why part. So what are some common mistakes or misconceptions relating to disaster prep? And then a lot of things are not disasters. They're unnatural disasters. How should we consider prepping for those?
The number one failing that I see in a lot of thinking and planning is, and I don't think it sounds like certainly not your mentality, and I'm doubting it's many of your listeners' mentality, but in the broader sort of classic prepper community, the grizzled guy kind of prepper community who has his guns and his bunker full of beans, that bunker mentality is the biggest right out of the gate baseline error that a lot of people have made historically. They say, well, I got mine, and I got all the rifles and the bullets and the cans of goods and the rice, so I'm going to be set. And when in fact, most people like me, a younger generation, very, very egalitarian, very anarchistic, very like community driven, it's like, yeah, I mean, I have like X many shotguns and rifles and this much ammo, because the moment of the disaster, I'm going to distribute that to my network of people. I'm going to make sure my neighbor, my neighbor has an extra battery to charge, like a battery bank I can charge the phones, but you actually don't have, your cousin was in town with you? So you only have one rifle in the whole house? Jesus Christ, take a fucking rifle. Like, I'm going to say, I have all this stuff for others. And in fact, if you look at a lot of natural disasters, that's what we see, except at the very elite, highest echelons, socioeconomically speaking. There is very much a panic mode for the people who are way at the top, and they often have less connection.
Zuckerberg owns what, half of Hawaii or something?
Yeah,
right?
Like he's going to jet set off to Hawaii and bunker down. But most people, from the middle class all the way down to the lowest working class, least among us in terms of economic and privilege, they all drop all that, and everyone is clearing brush out of roads, chainsawing trees, making sure, hey, can I put some tarp up over the side of your window? This tree caved in your side of your house here. Does your dog have enough water? Do you need pet food? Everyone's coming together, and you're not hunkered down. You're actually, how quickly can I be in touch with the people around me in a disaster, as opposed to avoiding all the people around me? That's right off the bat, the number one skewed thinking that I see.
Well, and also, it's something else I picked up when I was getting my ham radio license. I think it was around that time. Something somebody said was, in a natural disaster, you also want to do your best to not be a burden to the first responders, right? You don't want to have them come to you because you don't have a flashlight or you don't have some of the basics, right? So some of the prepping is for yourself, but it's also to make sure that you're not a burden on the other people, so they can handle the people that really need it.
Yeah. Can you self-treat? Can you self-rescue, et cetera? Yeah, absolutely. Which is such an act of care to your neighbors to do that.
As of today, Cory Doctorow is the single person that I have interviewed most often on this podcast. He is an amazing person. I don't know how he finds time to sleep. This man cranks out so many articles, so many books, does so many conferences, does so many media appearances. I don't know how he does it, but he is a real treat to have on the podcast. He is such an interesting person, and he always has such an interesting perspective and a way of talking about things. So in this last interview, we were talking about several things, but of course, we had to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and how that is impacting workers and the workforce today. And as always, he has some very interesting stories and terminology, much of which he has coined, like in shitification. And in this case, what he calls a reverse centaur, which I believe is going to be part of the subtitle of an upcoming book he has on artificial intelligence. And I should note he's swearing in here, and I forgot to mention before we did the one with Deviant that he also swore as well. So just a little bit late, but FYI, yeah, there's going to be a little bit of swearing in there. Well, and then now we have AI, right? The other thing is putting pressure on tech jobs, rightly or wrongly, because as a software engineer, I think it's a great tool. I think it could make me as a software engineer more productive, but it doesn't replace me. And yet I think there's a lot of bean counters and people getting those kind of bonuses that are saying we could replace 30% of our workforce with AI.
Well, I think the reason they're saying that is because they want to discipline their workers.
Sure.
In the same way that you had studio bosses who, you know, understand that the difference between giving notes to a writer's room and prompting an AI is not the stupid shit that comes out of your mouth, right? You're still going to say to both of them, make me E.T., but put a car chase in the second act, and maybe it's about a dog and give it a love interest. But the difference is that when you say it to the AI says, yes, sir, and barfs it up. Whereas when you say it to the writer's room, all work stops while they crawl around on the floor looking for the eyeballs that fell out of their heads when they were rolling their eyes at you, right? And the same way, tech bosses like fantasize furiously about a tech workforce that takes whatever bullshit they say and just salutes and runs it up the flagpole. And so they really want this to be true. It makes them marks for AI companies, right? Who are peddling AI. It's because they're selling them, they're pushing on an open door, right? They're selling them the thing they fantasize about. It's like selling an alchemist, a mercury milkshake, right? Like those guys want to drink the mercury. You're just helping them do it. And, you're helping them kill themselves, which is what we're helping these tech companies to do. To understand the relationship of AI and coders and why you meet coders who are like, I use AI and it's great and it's made my life so much better. And you meet other coders who are like, I use AI and I'm afraid to get in an airplane now because maybe they're using AI to write the code for it. Is you have to understand something from automation theory called centaurs and reverse centaurs. So a centaur, it's like a human head on a machine body. It's someone who's being assisted by a machine. So if you're a coder, and you're like, I can't remember the syntax for that command. And rather than Googling it, I'm going to ask the AI what it is. And if it's wrong, I'm going to know right away, right? I'm going to say, oh, I need a regex that does something, just to like as a one-off to not code you're going to run, but like to pull something out of a big file once that you want to do. And you can just tell whether it's pulled it out or not. Like you can see whether the regex works or not. And you know that there aren't any like weird corner cases because you're just using it once. You've got your test data right there. Those people who are like, oh, I use the thing to stop me from having to tinker with a regex for 45 minutes in the middle of a project that was much more important than reminding myself where the curly brace goes. That person is a centaur. But the reverse centaur is someone who their boss says, right, we've fired 9 of the 10 people in your department. The programming is now all going to be done by the chatbot. Your job is to review a superhuman amount of code. And if it makes anyone sick or kills someone or steals from someone, we're going to blame you, right? That person's a reverse centaur. And there's some other terms for this. There's moral crumple zone and accountability sink. Right, you are the accountability sink for the code.
Those are dark
and
terms.
Here's an example from non-coding that I think makes it really clear. You might remember a couple of weeks ago, the Chicago Sun-Times folded in a Hearst magazine supplement that was a summer guide, right? And it had like 30 summer lists of things to do, beaches to go to and food to try and stuff. And the summer reading guide had 15 books on it, and 10 of them were AI hallucinations. And Jason Kebler at 404 Media tracked the guy whose byline was on it and the guy said, yeah, you got me. I used AI. I use it for work. I feel really dumb about this. Normally I'm a lot more careful. I screwed up that day and it's really embarrassing. And that was the first article Jason wrote about. And a lot of people kind of dunked on this guy, and, rightly so. But then Jason did a follow-up, and the follow-up was about his experience at the Washington Monthly when he was an intern at the start of his career. And where they would do these summer guides, and the way that it would work is 3 interns would write each of these listicles, overseen by a real journalist with a fact checker on the back end. And he went and he looked at the summer guide that Hearst had published. It had 30 listicles with 1 byline on all of them, right? So this guy works in a newsroom where they fired 25 people, and he's the last man standing, and they're like, go write 30 guides. Also, we're not going to tell you not to use AI, but also, if the AI hallucinates and you don't catch it, guess who everyone's going to blame? Right? So that's, I think, the way to understand AI and its relationship to labor, that and the fact that you have a lot of workers who are very precarious, which I think is something that programmers should be paying attention to, because hackers, when there's enough hackers to go around, are going to be as precarious as taxi drivers or indeed nurses. And nurses increasingly in this country are hired by hospitals on a contract basis through one of 3 apps that call themselves, Uber for nursing, and that have replaced the dozens and dozens of local contracting services that used to work regionally and locally to give nurses shifts. And the way that these apps work is before the nurse is offered a shift, it looks up their credit history.
Oh, geez.
And if they're sitting on a ton of delinquent credit card debt, they get offered a lower wage.
Oh, my.
Because they're willing to work for less money. Now, that's it's not, I mean, probably there's some LLM gunk in there, but it's algorithmic, right?
Sure.
This is the algorithmic labor threat. It's not algorithmic unemployment where you were made obsolete. It's that like a job that doesn't exist because it can't exist, which is adjusting every worker's wage according to their credit history, because no one could do that because it requires a superhuman amount of speed and tedious labor. That is being automated algorithmically, and it's being used to take money away from workers and give it to their bosses. That is a technological employment and labor threat, and it's real. And it's not hypothetical, and it's not in the future, and it's not the Perplexity AI guys saying in 10 years, 30% of all jobs are going to be replaced by AI, which is a thing that he's backed up with the extensive data of nothing. You know, he got it from the important think tank, his ass. Right?
Right. Rectal extraction method is what I like to call that.
That's right. Yeah. So, you know, this is a real thing. Like, it's a real material thing in the world right now. And I think it's as salacious and titillating as any fantasy about AI stealing your job in the future. And I think we should be paying at least as much attention as we do to all that nonsense.
This next clip is from my interview with Monique Priestley, who is another amazing person. And I think I need to give credit to Heidi Sass for putting us together. If not, she was certainly one of the people that helped me to meet her. And I met Monique at, I think it was a Center for Democracy and Technology party in Washington, D.C. The International Association of Privacy Professionals, the IAPP, has this thing in the spring, a big privacy week. And a lot of people who are in the industry come to this conference, but a lot of people don't like the IAPP, think they've lost their way, think they have basically been co-opted by the corporations, what we call captured. And anyway, they have this big thing in DC, and because a lot of people are in town for that, there's all these other privacy things that spring up around that. And I went for those ancillary things, and along the way met some amazing people, including Monique Priestley. And she is a state representative in Vermont. She is a privacy evangelist and someone who is trying very hard to pass privacy legislation and came very close. But along the way, learned a lot about how politics work and lobbyists work, and is now sharing her learnings across multiple states and basically fighting back, because there's behind the scenes, there's all these coalitions of groups working to thwart privacy legislation. And she's basically saying, well, we as legislators and people who want privacy also need to band together and collaborate to fight back. And so this is a little bit of my interview with her, where she explains some of the many tactics and techniques that she learned were being used to thwart these privacy bills in multiple states. What are some of the other tactics that, and I'm curious in particular, the ones that you ran into, or maybe in your talks with the legislators from other states, what are some of the common tactics that are used to submarine a bill or to run out the clock? What are some of the things that they have learned to do? Put poison pills, amendments in bills that, they somehow get some writer put on that the governor won't sign, kind of thing. What are some other things you ran into? I'd love to hear any particular examples that you specifically ran into.
Yeah, so ones that I specifically ran into, one is like, an obvious one is having a conversation with me about one thing and then going and telling my committee members, my chair, my anything, a completely different thing. We actually had to make it so that I started having like a quote unquote buddy in my meetings, so that when they go and lie about what I said later, they can't. Wild. Another thing, there was just definitely like intimidation type stuff. So like I would ask for a one-on-one or a one-on-two, like with a lobbyist and their client, and in some cases I showed up to one call, and it was a team of 9 lawyers from around the country, and that was supposed to be a one-on-one, and it was just like, basically it's a like intimidation. I don't know what you're talking about. There was a lot, especially as a first termer in 23, 24. There was a lot of people, lobbyists, who are like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're new to this. You're not supposed to be wherever you are. So like in both years, I've spent a lot of time in the Senate, in the AG's office, like talking to the people the players who have influence on this too. So I would get a lot of like, you're not supposed to do this as a rep. You don't know what you're doing. And then there's a lot of like, you can't possibly understand, or, just any type of like thing like that. And I know other people I've talked to other legislators who have heard that, especially coming at it with tech backgrounds. They'll be all like, you can't implement this, and you're going to kill the internet, you're going to kill the economy. In some cases, you're going to kill puppies and cats because you literally are stripping away like targeted marketing that might have people adopt cats, and then they're going to die because people won't find them. And so there's stuff like that. We're going to pull our services out of the state of Vermont completely. So like Facebook will just leave, Amazon will just leave. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of just the influence behind the scenes. So I've been able to pick up on it more when I know that people are either, there's been some cases where there was like romantic relationships between lobbyists and politicians, legislators. Or just like friends relationships, and that happens as a small state. So like, and I also have hung out plenty of times with people, lobbyists.
Well, and there's often a revolving door between
totally.
politics and corporations.
Yeah, for sure. So, but you can, the tactic kind of there is like, they're using that relationship to sway somebody. You can easily kind of tell that that's happening, though, because I would ask pointed questions about specific things, and I would ask, even if it was a softball question, there's only so many talking points they've been prepped on, and then they've run out those talking points, and they can't translate those talking points into a bigger idea or an idea that's similar because they haven't been taught how to translate it to another scenario. What else? I got backstabbed hard the first year because I was helping one firm run a bill and was championing it for them, and then at the same time they had another client who wanted to kill the privacy bill. And I didn't realize that I think, like, basically they had negotiated between the clients to not care about the private right of action. So they, like, didn't see it as a conflict. But basically I was championing one bill at one time. I was telling them all these things I was doing and working on. And then they were using it against me to kill my privacy bill. So there's that. I don't know. There's, I think Sarah Love on the video had talked about death by 1,000 cuts. So what you had said is, like, yeah, we'll have different entities, different like firms working together, and I had gotten some evidence from somebody of weekly emails that were happening between all of the firms with Kingman, and as an example, and so they were coordinating basically on like how to rebut all of the different like provisions in the bill and that kind of stuff. But I mean, in a lot of ways, like it was really helpful to see all the tactics that first year and to experience all of this, because then I was like, well, I need to build a coalition. I need to learn how to do rebuttal documents on the fly. I need to have as many experts on my side as possible that I can call on the fly and be like, hey, they just said this. Can you tell me if it's true and or how to fight it? And also nearly all the things they told me that I wasn't supposed to do, I'm like, well, I'm going to do those twice as much. So I spent most of my time this year in the Senate. I built testimony lists. I built FAQs. I gave people floor support documents for stuff. So it was a lot of like all the tactics that were being used. I'm like, well, I can do those too.
And next up, we've got one of my other favorite people on the planet, and that is Carissa Véliz, who wrote the amazing book, Privacy is Power. If you haven't read it, go buy it and read it. Just trust me, it's amazing. She's a philosophy professor and has a really interesting and poignant take on why privacy is so important, not just for us individually, but for us collectively, for democracy, for society. It is an amazing read. And even if you think you understand why privacy is important, you really should just read this book and then buy it for everybody you know for Christmas. It's that good. Anyway, I bugged her for years to come on the show, and she finally did. And I think she had a good time because then she came back and she's promising to come back yet again when her new book comes out next spring. So very much looking forward to that. Well, we were talking, of course, about artificial intelligence, and I apologize for the fact that there's so many clips about that, but it's just been such a hot topic this year, and there's so many angles to discuss. So we got into some of the deeper things about AI and how it's going to affect jobs, but then how it's going to affect like working in general and what the future might be like with AI. And do we need to consider when the robots take over everything and no one has work to do anymore, what we do about that? Do we have universal basic income? What does that mean for things like dignity and how we value ourselves? We put so much into what we do as a career, defining who we are as a person. So here in this clip, we talk a little bit about that, and she gives her perspective. We can't not address this part of the issue, and that is the impact on jobs. It's undoubtedly true that AI will significantly impact many occupations. And on one hand, it may eliminate entire classes of occupations, but on the other, it also may allow workers to be much more productive. It may also create entirely new classes of jobs. What do you think the net impact will be? Will it be positive or negative? What does the future of work look like long term? Is it time to seriously consider things like universal basic income or job guarantees, or what do we think about the dignity and purpose of work in a society where machines do everything?
That is a big question.
It is a big question.
The first thing to say is don't believe anyone who is confident about the future, because the future isn't written and nobody knows. And if somebody says they know, they're either lying to themselves or to you. And I have good colleagues, even friends, who cite these numbers about the future of jobs that have no backing. That's just made up. And yeah, it's a hypothesis. But it's incredible how, if somebody pulls out a number out of thin air, people will quote it, you will see graphs.
Oh, yeah.
It's like it's real because it's a number. It's real. No, it's just a number. So I don't know what the future of jobs is, and neither does anyone else in the world. I don't care how much of an expert they think they are. But there are some trends, and I think trends matter. It doesn't mean that it's always going to be like this, but the trend that I see is one of more extreme inequality, in which the people who have more and who have control of the AI are becoming more and more wealthy. So I wrote something in which I happened to mention that Elon Musk was the richest person in the world. And I think at that point, it was a year ago when I started writing this, my forthcoming book. And he had something like 200 billion. And then, closer to publication, I wanted to update that. So I checked again. And now he has 400 billion. He doubled his wealth in a year. And so we're seeing that trend, and that trend is very concerning. Another concerning trend that I see is that we're being sold the idea that, AI is going to do all the boring jobs and we will do the fun ones. But what I see around me is that, no, AI is doing the fun jobs and we're doing the drudgery. Mm-hmm. So AI is now doing the images and the logos, and it's doing a pretty bad job, but we're just rolling with it because it's cheaper. And we are doing the paperwork and the admin and all like the horrible things. So that worries me. And universal basic income. This is something that I'm worried about, because what people forget is that work is not only important to give you a sense of fulfillment, a sense of agency, a sense of mastery, a community. Work does a lot of things. It's not only about money. And I would argue it's not even primarily about money. But perhaps the most important function of work is the ability to stop working. So when things get really bad, the ability to strike has been very important historically. That we can say, like, look, we're not going to do this anymore, and everything stops. Trains stop, and the mail stops, and universities stop. And that forces leaders to say, okay, something is really wrong. Because if people are willing to stop earning money that they need, something must be really bad. If we have a scenario, which I don't know how realistic it can be, but let's say, just for the sake of argument, that we have a scenario in which most people don't work and they just get a universal basic income, things can get really bad and they have no leverage, absolutely no leverage, because there's no ability to strike anymore. I think these tech executives are playing a very dangerous game, and this is a social experiment at a grand scale, and I'm not very comfortable being part of it.
Well, okay. So again, just playing devil's advocate, the Trekkie in me, there's this utopian world where money doesn't matter because we've got all the resources we need anymore. No one needs to work because the computers can do everything, and we can all feel free to pursue our passions and do what we want to do. That's a utopian vision that some people paint, right? As a philosopher, what's your take on that?
Well, I just wrote a paper about it and published it, and argued that that's like a logical possibility. And I think in that case, we could have a life of play and a life of virtue. One of the problems with democracy is that people are so overwhelmed that they don't have time enough to be a citizen. Mm. And it would be great if we could get more time to be a citizen, to actually think about what kind of life do we want and how do we organize society, and to actually participate, not only voting, but being an active participant in. So I think that's a logical possibility. Is that likely? I don't think it is. I don't think that's the way we're walking. Like, what would need to happen for that to change? I think a lot of things. But if you tell me, is that the trend that you're watching? Is it a trend towards less work and more spending time with your loved ones and being a good citizen? That's not a trend I see in the world right now.
All right, we have one more clip from 2025. And again, there were so many great interviews this year, and it was so hard to pick all the clips. And I had more picked than I could even use and still fit this into roughly an hour-long show. But I want to end on this one in particular because after talking with Josh Corman many times and paying attention to his I Am the Cavalry group to begin with, and then the Undisruptible 27 campaign that he's currently on, and understanding the importance of Volt Typhoon and the impact it could definitely have on our critical infrastructure and how critical that critical infrastructure actually is. We're so used to having water and electricity. And yeah, when there's a natural disaster, sometimes for several hours, maybe several days, in rare circumstances, we might be without these things and we understand the importance of them. What we're not really prepared for is unnatural disasters. That is cyber attacks. And this is not theoretical. China has been trying to establish multiple footholds in our key infrastructure so that they could cripple us at a moment's notice if they wanted to. They have come out and said that they want to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. And the notion is among the top national security people and groups in the United States, and they testified in front of Congress to say as much, is that prepositioning themselves in our infrastructure, getting ready to do something without quite yet doing something, is potentially in preparation for such an invasion where they would want to keep us on the sidelines. But even if you don't buy into that particular theory, our infrastructure, the things that keep us alive, water, electricity, wastewater, food, gas, and other types of energy, all of these things are woefully vulnerable to internet attacks. And after COVID, we put a lot of these systems on the internet so that we could remotely administer them, but we didn't put in the requisite security. And honestly, what Josh is and the groups like him under the Cyber Resilience Corps are trying to fight for really is resilience, not just preventing the attacks, not just keeping them from happening at all, but to make sure that when they do, and they will, that we can recover from an attack, or we could take that first punch, as Josh likes to say. So I interviewed Josh, I interviewed Jake Braun, who's part of DEF CON Franklin, and I interviewed a panel of folks from the Cyber Resilience Corps more recently about this problem and what we're doing about it and the volunteer organizations that are springing up to address these needs. And part of the problem is a lot of these utilities are very small. They're almost mom and pop kind of organizations. They're private organizations. They're not, they're not run by the government, though they obviously will have close ties with local government. But these critical infrastructure facilities, these utilities that we take for granted, often have no IT staff whatsoever, let alone a dedicated cybersecurity person on staff. And so they need help. And I'm going to be trying to put together some more stuff around this, maybe as part of my New Year's resolutions for 2026, where we as citizens, as people in our communities, can help marry our local utility folks with these volunteer organizations and get them help, because I guarantee they need it. So this is one snippet of that interview. And if you missed it, you should definitely go back and listen to it, where one of the 4 panelists that I had on this discussion, Adrian Ogee, had some really wise words about who is being targeted and who needs to be prepared for such attacks.
Okay, maybe if I can jump in here. One thing is, when you're walking right of boom and organizations come to you because they've been hit and they need help, the reluctance tends to go away quite quickly. When you're trying to convince those organizations to work with you and invest resources prior to something happening, we tend to see a lot more resistance, not so much around the very idea of securing themselves, but around the notion that they may even be a target. We work with nonprofits all around the world, and I'm sure that some of the organizations that you support, although they have important missions, don't always think that they're going to be a target for cybercriminals or threat actors. And, if I can root back the discussion a little bit in history, I tend to think that this is due mostly to the military doctrines that have led to the construction of the critical infrastructure protection programs that we see in the West, whether in the US, in the UK, and other countries. It's rooted really in the World War II and Cold War and the idea of bombers and nuclear warfare and this idea of protecting the many of those large-scale attacks. And it's not really recognizing the reality of cyber today, in particular with the rise of ransomware as a service that's leading criminal groups to attack anything they can, whether it's a Fortune 500 company or a small utility or a small shelter that has virtually no budget. What we see when we deal with ransomware cases is that criminals realize after the attack that they've hit, for instance, an orphanage. And so they offer discounts instead of getting rid of the actual attack.
Nice, that's nice.
But it's telling you that now they're attacking anything they can, which means that small community organizations that are critical to a few people, think of a shelter, think of a food bank, an orphanage. If those organizations shut down permanently because their funding is gone, or a small hospital, the critical nature of that attack to those people is as bad as a nuclear attack on many.
Right.
And so it's a paradigm shift that our countries have not yet operated, which makes me very optimistic for the future when I see CISA launching things like the Grace was mentioning earlier, the High-Risk Communities Protection Initiative out of the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. Even the fact that CISA has a department called JCDC is great. It's not the case all around the world. And it's telling you that governments, including leading governments from a cybersecurity standpoint, are recognizing that their abilities to help those organizations is so limited that they're going to need to rely on community level cybersecurity. And that's why the importance of everything that those volunteer groups are doing is so critical and is so timely, right? Maybe 10, 15 years ago, those organizations would not have been legitimate targets or would not have been lucrative targets for criminals. But thanks to the rise of ransomware as a service, thanks to lowering costs of attacks with AI, as Eric was mentioning, it's becoming profitable to go after the little guy, actually more profitable and safer than to go after the big guy, right? A couple of years back, there was a famous attack that happened in the US on the East Coast against Colonial Pipeline. I'm sure many of you will remember. It was all over the news. Putin actually flew to Geneva to meet with, I think it was Biden at the time, to discuss the attack, saying it was like a notorious thing. The attackers made out with about, I think it was $4 million, but the FBI was able to recoup about half of it. But, the attackers were all over the press. These people cannot fly anywhere anymore. Their life is a mess now. And at about the same time was an attack against a small nonprofit in the US that was getting USAID funding, still several millions of funding. And through a very simple CEO fraud attack, they were able to get out with $1 million. Now, you haven't heard of that attack. Most people haven't. Those criminals, took that money and left and are able to travel. And so what we're afraid of in our community is this shift from attacking the traditional critical infrastructure as, we think of it, like the big banks and the big like nuclear plants and whatnot, and criminals starting to leverage the new tools they've got to attack the mass and really have a profound impact at community level. And so cyber volunteers are a solution, but at the same time, it's not okay to rely on volunteers, right? People have jobs, students have things to do, and they're going to graduate. Veterans or retirees have already contributed a lot. How can we make this sustainable? How can we make it scale? How can this idea of community security or community defense really play a role in national security is what this group is all about. So the CRC is really trying to elevate those notions so that we can really play a role in national security and find solutions that scale.
All right, there you have it. The best of 2025, or at least some of the best snippets from 2025. If you missed any of those episodes, maybe this will inspire you to go back and listen to them. And again, this is a great episode to share with other folks who you think might be interested in this podcast, just to give them a taste of the kind of things that we cover here. So there are links in the show notes for each of these original episodes, so that'll help you find them more easily. And I've been doing this best of thing for a while, actually. So if you want to go back and search on best of on the podcast site, you'll find other shows with other clips from previous years that you might also want to check out yourself or share with others. So for next week, I went back into the vaults, picked out a gem, a golden oldie, a great interview from several years ago. It was my first interview with Troy Hunt, who is the owner and operator of the wonderful site Have I Been Pwned? And we talk about his site and data breaches and protecting yourself from data breaches and that sort of thing. And unfortunately, almost everything still holds up today, even though it was like 7 years ago when I did that interview. And then the week after that, we'll do the best of the bonus content from 2025. Again, this is snippets from the stuff that I give only to my patrons. But I will say that if you become a patron, you get access to all of that stuff. And there are, I think, over 200 different episodes now of that bonus content. A lot of it is extra Q&A with my guests. We talk about maybe more personal things or tangential subjects. And then for my top patrons, I've got another series of podcasts that I call Merlin's Musings, which is me usually talking about more technical subjects or more behind the scenes kind of stuff. And I'm still putting together the best of the bonus episode for this year, but I might try to sneak in a representative Merlin's Musings episode from the last year as well, so you can get a taste of what those are like. So since I'm not doing news shows in December, if you want to stay up on the latest stuff, you can follow me on social media. That's usually where I'll post any urgent software updates, things you want to be aware of and not want to wait until next year to find out about. You can find the list of my social media handles on my website at firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. Or if you can remember this, you can go to fdsd.me/contact, singular. And again, I don't post too much there, but that is where I will post something like, hey, go update all your Apple devices or your Android devices or whatever, because there's a critical fix. All right, that's going to do it for this week. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Take care. Stay safe out there. Happy holidays. And until next time, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.